too far, please. Could I ask Representative Roberts to come up and testify on House Bill 5620? Representative 5620 first, please.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. This is before you because I felt it was needed because of the, I think we've all heard probably about the prostitution that was going on in Motel 6 in Warwick. And I have been speaking to the chief of police in Coventry. And we don't want this, of course, in our neighborhood. So there were a couple of motels that they suspected some action was going on. And what we want to be able to do here is to hold the business owners accountable for allowing prostitution to go on. This would include landlords, and business owners, and business managers.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions for Representative Roberts? Sure. Vice Chair Costa.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Roberts, first of all, I'd like to commend you and thank you for putting this important piece of legislation in. I think when you have kidnappers and people that are sex trafficked, especially young women and children, and they're hanging out in a Motel 6, then they need to be accountable, the owners need to be accountable, and corporate America has to be accountable for what goes on in their actions. And it's a great bill, and I commend you for it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's precisely why I am introducing this.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Representative Roberts? Representative, if you could stay right there. If we could call Hillary Davis back up from the ACLU. Hillary?
Thank you once again, Chairman and members of the committee. While we certainly understand what the representative is trying to do with this legislation, we are very concerned with its impact. While we've been talking a lot about sex trafficking and those sorts of issues lately, we need to acknowledge that there are very legitimate reasons why persons voluntarily and willingly engage in prostitution, and very often that involves support for their family, support for the people that they live with. Unfortunately, the way this bill is worded, what it says is that if a landlord knows that an individual is engaging in prostitution, they are required to essentially evict the person from their home or face significant penalties, because that rent is probably being paid by proceeds from prostitution. So that individual who is engaging in prostitution to feed their family is faced with essentially mandatory eviction under this legislation. We are concerned with the unintended impact of it, and so we do oppose the bill at this time. And I can answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Any questions for Hillary? Representative Almeida.
Thank you for Representative Roberts. Representative Roberts, do we know, I thought I saw in the news that some of the folks are coming down from the corporate office for Motel 6. Do you know what that meeting was about, or do you have anything?
No, I didn't look into that.
Okay, no worries. All right, thank you.
Good. Vice Chair Costa, you want to answer that question for Representative
Yes, I
Almeida?
do, Representative Almeida. I had a conversation with Mayor Avedigian about what was going on at Motel 6. He has corporate America coming down, flying in from Motel 6, and what they're going to talk about possibly police detail there 24/7, not at the taxpayers' expense in Warwick. And he has several ideas that he's going to be talking with them about. He is the Mayor Avedigian and I have been in contact several times. I will be calling him again this week and find out how the meeting is, and possibly have a meeting with the mayor. So that's the information we have now on the people coming down from Motel 6. Motels, well, they're in negotiation right now. That's what they're talking about. That's the conversation that I had with Mayor Avedigian, because it shouldn't be on the taxpayers' dime, number one, and the owners of Motel 6 should be held accountable for it, because there was 75 arrests there. It was sex trafficking, it was drugs, it was whatever. So there's a game plan in place, and I'm sure I'll get back to you with all the information that the mayor puts in place.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then the last piece is, how would Motel 6 know there's sexual activity in there?
How wouldn't you know? There's 75 arrests there.
No, I'm talking about at the point of the crime being committed.
Well, that's where the cops are going to come in. That's where the police presence is going to come in. Sure, we're working on it.
Okay, all right.
Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, could we hear from Brenda Lee Smith from Stop Abduction, please?
Members of the committee, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
How's that?
There you go.
Okay. I'm Italian. You should be able to hear me without this.
It's for the
No.
folks listening at home.
Would know by Smith, though. Again, my name is Brenda Lee Smith, and I am the founder of Stop Abduction, an organization providing educators and students with a preventative curriculum program. We incorporate life skill instruction and physical resistance training for elementary, secondary, and college students who learn how to protect themselves from abductors and online predators. Our goal at Stop Abduction is twofold: to prevent violence and to interrupt harmful habits from becoming destructive lifestyles to students in kindergarten through college. I am here tonight to discuss why our great state is in need of a comprehensive strategy relating to individuals that would persuade or induce a person to commit prostitution and/or an individual who receives funds derived from prostitution and/or any individual who knowingly allows prostitution. I would like to have this bill move for passage because of the following. In July of 2014, 3 male individuals in Rhode Island participated in apprehending a 17-year-old female. They rented her to individuals for sex acts approximately 5 times a day for an approximate period of 30 days. All of this took place at a hotel in Warwick. None of these individuals are serving time. And more recently, a 16-year-old female was rented out for sex at a motel in Warwick, the one that you just recently mentioned. It is no coincidence that these hotels are near our airport. Unfortunately, young girls are taken in and out of our state for the purposes of prostitution, and some of them are younger than 8 years old. Also, those looking to rent individuals for sex will enter our state through an airport and use the hotels in Warwick to obtain sex from prostitutes. But please keep in mind, some of these prostitutes are younger than the age of 15. Also, a former worker from the Cadillac Lounge told a local investigative reporter 70 to 80% of the dancers engaged in prostitution in the private booths. Each time a dancer takes someone into a private area, the club gets cut of the money. And according to an ABC 10 investigation, sex is apparently for sale in more than half dozen massage parlors in Providence. There is much evidence that girls whom we call prostitutes are being commercially sex trafficked in gentlemen clubs and massage parlors right here in the state of Rhode Island. A percentage of that money that is made from the girls is given to the owners or managers of these establishments. In addition, there is also evidence that pimps bring girls to hotels, truck stops, and apartments to be rented out for sex acts. Whether someone is receiving a percentage of the income or simply allowing the activity of sex trade on its premises, there should be a punishment that acts as a deterrent for such crimes. We have a significant problem that we must address through the implementation of this bill. 1 in 3 teens on the street will be lured towards prostitution within 48 hours of leaving home. And a pimp can make $150,000 to $200,000 per child each year, and the average pimp has 5 to 6 girls. We have become a nation that is greatly obsessed with sex, and it is destroying us. With the passing of Bill 5620, individuals such as boyfriends, spa managers, pimps, and sex traffickers who persuade or use force to rent out individuals for sex acts, or any person who receives any money or anything of value from any sex act, or any person who is aware of such acts should be prosecuted. I urge you today to pass this bill and enable the state of Rhode Island to continue to stand with a specific purpose to put an end to an out-of-control mindset of lawlessness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Thank you. Any questions for Brenda Lee? Representative Almeida.
Thank you for testifying. You said that some of the folks, some of these men that are, I'm assuming, are bringing these girls across state line?
Yes.
Have any of these folks been, these guys, or whomever, been charged, maybe the lawyers can help me, with the Mann Act that you know?
I'm not familiar with that particular act, but there has been charges brought for those who are convicted. Okay. Unfortunately, some of this goes under the radar. In fact, most of it does. But for those individuals who are prosecuted, we need a system that will prosecute them more thoroughly and more extensively.
For sure. And then the last piece, there was one part in your testimony, you said that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I apologize.
Sure.
That there was a crime that was committed and no one was locked up? No one got charged?
Correct. Yes, there were 3 individuals who were involved in that particular incident. They did go through the system with various paying bond and so forth, but they did not serve time. If given the opportunity, I could share who the individuals are in a private discussion and give you more specifics on
That's
on
okay,
that.
trust me, I tell you. And the victim, whatever happened to her?
Well, she was found on a website, unfortunately, with her picture being rented out for sex. And her mother found her. She was a runaway. Her mother found her on the Backpage website. And she alerted the law enforcement that this was going on at that particular location in Warwick, Rhode Island. They then went there and do what they do best and arrested the individuals associated with this. That young lady is now recovering at home with her family.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions for Brenda Lee? If I could ask you to stay right there, because I think you signed up for the next bill as well.
Yes.
That will conclude testimony on House Bill 5620 by Representative Roberts. And Representative Roberts, if I could ask you to take up next House Bill 5632. And I also don't see Rachel Orsinger in the room. If somebody could call her in from, she's going to be the next witness. So Representative Roberts, House Bill 5632, please.
This bill is before you to give parents of consenting age minors the option to get a restraining order when they think that their child is involved in a relationship that they deem as inappropriate or dangerous. Currently, well, I don't know actually if, I'm going to give an example here. I don't know if you heard about the story. There was a case in Coventry, March 27th, I believe it was. I'm trying to find the paperwork, where there was a 40-year-old man that was caught with child pornography and a 15-year-old in his car. Actually, it's right here. And I don't know if the parents, what the parents did to try and prevent this. I'm sure they did something. But this is an obvious issue, and I know somebody else who has had to deal with this issue before, where she had trouble keeping a 24-year-old away from her 16-year-old. And when she called the police, they couldn't catch him, but she tried to get a restraining order in order to discourage him from coming around, and when she went to the Kent County Courthouse, they told her that there was nothing that she could do. So as a parent, this is very discouraging, and I think that this bill needs to be passed.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Roberts? Could we hear from Brenda Lee again?
Yes, and thank you again, Chairman and members of the committee. I would like to have this bill moved for passage to enable a parent to obtain a restraining order against an adult individual for the benefit of a minor child, when the minor child is either unable or unwilling to file on their own behalf. Sex crime are unfortunately fairly common in the United States. There are over 1,800 registered sex offenders in Rhode Island alone, and those are just the ones that have been caught and convicted. Recently in the state of Rhode Island, 22 men were charged with soliciting sex from underage girls. It is estimated that 1 in every 5 girls and 1 in every 7 boys are sexually abused by the time they reach adulthood. Sex crimes can involve physical conduct, for example, unwanted sexual touching, or no physical contact, for example, internet crimes. Most sexual offenses are committed by someone the victim knows, a family member, a friend, an intimate partner, or an acquaintance. Many pimps recruit underage girls while pretending to be their boyfriend. Approximately 20% of all child sexual abuse victims in the United States are under the age of 8. Most victims do not report sexual abuse to authorities because they are afraid that their abuser will harm them again, do not want to make a very private matter public, are worried that they will be blamed for what happened and that they would not be believed. They feel ashamed, guilty, and even embarrassed. This means that there are both victims and offenders in the community who have not come to the attention of the authorities. victims may continue to be in situations that put them at risk and/or not getting the services they need, while offenders can potentially be prevented from reoffending and not receiving the support they need to stop. There is no such thing as a typical sex offender. Sex offenders can be a male or female, be young or old, have different levels of education, be married or single, have strong ties to their families and communities, or have no record of prior criminal involvement or either sexual or non-sexual offenses. It is imperative that we as a state take steps to prevent, recognize, and react responsibly to the reality of child sexual abuse here in our own state. It is with a great hope that our judicial strategies will eliminate such acts. I believe it is our instinctive responsibility to protect and defend now more than ever. We certainly find ourselves in a battle of moral decay. It has been estimated that 89% of all pornography is produced in the United States. And frankly, when we put garbage in, we certainly get garbage out. Albert Einstein once said, "The world will not be destroyed by those who watch them without doing anything." We have spent decades building and repairing what I would call roadblocks that exist in the form of preventative education, victim rights, rehabilitative programs, and the court of law. We must continue to stand shoulder to shoulder and demand consequences of child sexual abuse by passing Bill 5632. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you, Brenda Lee. Any questions?
I'd like to just say one more thing, please.
Sure, Representative Roberts.
Currently, as the law stands, what's happening here is they expect the child who is a minor and is not able to exercise good judgment to be the one that initiates the restraining order. So sometimes that child has been tricked, intimidated, and they just won't do that. This will allow the parents the ability to do that, whether the child agrees with it or not. And I think we have an obligation to get this done.
Thank you, Representative Roberts. Representative O'Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Roberts, for bringing this forward. You say that this bill would allow parents to make that decision for their children. As a parent of a 9-year-old daughter, I would be highly supportive of doing that if I discovered a relationship that I felt was inappropriate. This seems to also empower interested parties, which are not parents, and it's unclear to me from the definition here if there are any limits on who might.
This is actually intended.
Party?
Yes, I'm sorry. This is actually intended for anyone who is unrelated by blood.
Are there limits on that, or that could be anybody?
Yeah, the way it was worded in the bill, it was to discourage situations where, say, people are going through a divorce and somebody can make a false claim on the opposite parent. We want to avoid anything like that. So that's why it was worded in such a way that it is only for people who are unrelated by blood, at least so far, anyway.
Thank you. Could we hear from Rachel Ossinger from the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence? Rachel? And Rachel, when you're done your testimony, if I could ask you to stay there, that would be great.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. And thank you, Representative Roberts, for talking about this bill with me earlier this week. So we're here in opposition to this bill. Unfortunately, we think that as much as we understand the intentions and...
Your microphone on?
Am I good? Can you hear me? As much as we understand the really frustrating and tragic situations that have led to this bill being in place, we just don't think that this actually works well with the current system and is unworkable the way it's written. I gave you a letter with more detailed concerns. I think that there are sort of procedural, victims' rights, and sort of constitutional concerns with how it is as at present. But let me just back up and explain to you how juvenile restraining orders work right now. Right now, it is impossible for anyone under the age of 18 to go get their own restraining order. Their parent has to go file on their behalf. So this bill doesn't make it possible for that to happen because it is already possible. That's not a change that this bill makes. What this bill as written does is it lowers the evidence required to obtain a restraining order, and this is a domestic violence restraining order, so this is not a contempt of court restraining order, this is an arrestable restraining order under which you lose your federal gun rights, are subject to the extended sanctions of the Domestic Violence Prevention Act. by saying that one of the new definitions of domestic violence is not just what we know to be domestic violence, but also a parent thinking that a relationship is dangerous. I understand that probably wasn't the intent. The way it's written, that's what it does. We're also concerned about the interested parties language that Rep. Grady brought up. I think as written, it is very broad. It brings up sort of constitutional troxel concerns about whether third parties can insert themselves into the child-parent relationship through the courts at any time. It also brings up concerns about whether abusive parents could then use this as a way to further isolate their children, and the court would not have the discretion to work against it because all the parent would have to prove was that they thought the relationship was dangerous, not that the relationship actually was dangerous. So as I said, right now a parent can go without their child's permission and request a restraining order. Will they get one? Probably not. And I understand the frustration of those cases because these are due process entitled proceedings. The person who is going to be restrained will show up, they'll say there's no abuse going on, and if the victim is also saying there's no abuse going on, that parent is going to have a hard time convincing a judge that they have met the preponderance of evidence necessary to put that restraining order in place. So I highly suggest that you think about what would be best practice in these situations and how the family court and DCYF can support these families that are going through this terrible situation and often very dangerous. But we don't think that necessarily sort of non-consensual restraining orders where the victim is not willing to go along with them is going to be the most effective way to make this happen.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Representative Roberts.
Yes,
This is not a forum for back and forth. That's the only thing
Okay, I just forgot to mention, though, that this
That
person...
would be great. Fine, please.
This person did go to the courthouse because that child would not initiate that restraining order. When the parent went to the courthouse, she was told N-O, no. So that is a fact.
Okay. All right, you raised some concerns. Rachel raises some concerns. Perhaps you guys could get together sometime and talk about it some more and maybe continue to work on this very important issue. Okay, so with that, we will conclude testimony on House Bill 5632 by Representative Roberts and move on to Representative Roberts' final bill of the night, House Bill 5661. Representative Roberts, whenever you're ready.
Okay, sure. This is a simple one. And all this is for is so that a person who has been abused or sexually abused has the option to go and report the abuse with the police and have the police pursue those charges for the victim without any time limits on it. So in other words, if they came later and maybe 10 years after the fact, this is so the police can't turn them away and say, well, you know, it's been too long and just not pursue the charges, because sometimes these people, when they go through this, they have repressed memories or they've been intimidated somehow, and this bill would just make it easier if this were passed for them to pursue that perpetrator.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Representative Roberts? Rachel?
I'm just here to support this bill because we think that easing the timely requirement on victims of sexual assault who face particular burdens in reporting in a timely fashion makes a lot of sense. Those victims' rights can be really important to someone having a voice in the proceedings, and we appreciate your attention to it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Rachel? Okay, that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5661. And next, in an act of